Do you think there's underrepresented areas in this community that aren't getting this STEM education?
We live in an impoverished community in our urban settings, in our rural settings. On one side of this and on the other side of it, you have some of the most high-level career opportunities in the entire world in our backyards. And so there's this gap that needs to be filled. Well, my name is Lauren Kochian. I am the president of the Milton J. Rubenstein Museum of Science and Technology, which most of us in the community know as the MOST. I am a single mom of 2 teenagers. I have a 16-year-old and actually an almost 20-year-old. So, yeah, pretty wild, actually, to say that out loud. I am a Syracuse native, a Syracuse lifer. I've been here most of my life. Born and raised, including attending Syracuse University, left for a little while for what I thought was a dream career. And then turned out it wasn't. So I sort of came back to regroup, get my master's degree, figure out what I wanted to do, and sort of just, have been here ever since. And found this new career path at the same time. And Central New York is really an amazing place to raise a family. So fortunate that sort of the change in my career landed me back home.
No, love that. That was fantastic. We're going to talk about a lot of different things in this podcast, but I know you're very passionate about STEM. Can you give me a brief description of what STEM is?
Sure. Well, I'll try to be a brief in terms of what STEM is, but STEM is studying science, technology, engineering, and math. And STEM education, I am really passionate about it. And it's funny because it isn't my background. It isn't what I studied. But when you go to a place like the MOST, which is a science educational institution, and you see how important that is for a student's education, and you see what the future looks like in the entire world, but what the future looks like in Central New York, the value of STEM education and the value of STEM from a toddler right up through people who are no longer in their studies, just science appreciation in our adulthood. It's integral to everything we do, but in my role in particular, I'm so passionate about it because that's where a really robust future comes into play for our kids, our students, our community.
Yep. Yeah. So let's talk more about that. Why is it important to have our young ones in our community be more involved in STEM?
Well, I think it's important because, like I said, certainly the workforce in Central New York is STEM related. And I will say, when I say STEM, that M takes on a lot of meanings. Manufacturing is certainly a part of STEM. Medicine is a part of STEM. You could really say that science and STEM isn't everything. But in our community in particular, we really have always been a STEM region, a manufacturing community, an education community, a medical community. That's only going to continue. And actually, it's going to exponentially grow. So for me, my work has always been about nonprofit work, supporting our community. I've been a fundraiser for so many charities. My commitment to the MOST and my passion about that is integral to my commitment to supporting the community. When I think about our students and education, and I think about what the MOST does, which is make that science education contextualized and understandable and fun and hands-on. Not only do those things go hand in hand, but it's really important when you think about the future. What we do is really important, and it makes our community even richer to have a place like the MOST. And maybe our mission statement doesn't state this, but really what we want to do and what we're trying to do is give those kids an opportunity to have a really great life here or anywhere, ideally here. And what I mean by that is where all of those jobs are. And STEM jobs are great careers. They're well paying. They have great benefits. if a kid grows up and studies STEM or does an apprenticeship in a manufacturing trade and or gets a job at a hospital or at a Micron or goes on to innovate something awesome, they're gonna have an opportunity for a great life, a happy life, a healthy life. And let's face it, that's what we want for all of our kids, not just our own. And that's where a place like the Most might just be a small part of that, but it's a really important part of that. And that's why I will always push for STEM education, whether I'm at the Most or anywhere I am, because it's that important to our future.
How do we get kids involved in STEM? How do we get them excited for it?
Places like the Most really do a great job of that, certainly. But it has to be everywhere. The challenges in education are huge and they are systemic. But the solutions, though, require all of us. I see the Most as an integral part of that. As a parent, I see myself as a part of that. But I believe that truly is for everybody. The best education and the best way to get kids sort of this like end game is really this holistic look at it, right? We talk a lot of in sort of the STEM world about STEM ecosystems, right? So it's not just your public or your private education and your field trip to the Most. Those things are great because they're important because kids have to do them because you are going to get them excited about it. But that's not enough. I mean, we have to address life skills and make sure kids are coming to school fed and rested, making sure that their mental health is intact. But we also have to have places like 325 spreading the word about why this is important. We need companies, and even if you're not a STEM company, we need companies to recognize how important this is to the community and support it. Whether it's, we do these cool programs with companies that do STEM where they actually come in and do the curation. They come in and do the work. We have an innovation station. Right now it's WEP, and which is Water Environmental Protection, which is a department of Onondaga County. And we do these temporary exhibits. WEP is talking to kids about wastewater and what happens when you flush your toilet. That gets a kid interested in STEM, and they don't even necessarily know that they're learning. We need things like that, and they need to be, sort of immersed in it whenever they can. But I am a believer that if that end game for all of us is kids that are filling these thousands of jobs in our community in STEM, we all have to work towards it.
Absolutely. So we work with a lot of different companies in engineering and architecture and science and different things. And I do feel like I know that they're worried what the future is going to be like in 10, 20 years as far as the job pool. Luckily, I think there's more attention on Syracuse now, so hopefully we can draw and inspire people from outside of Syracuse. But we've filmed videos specifically trying to draw people to be part of STEM and be part of architecture and different things like that. Do you worry that we're not implementing STEM enough, or that the job pool is going to shrink?
I do worry about it for so many reasons, right? There's this great expression, and I've used this a lot at the Most because when I came to the Most 8 years ago, it was a much different place. And while we're still evolving, we're in a better place. And I say this all the time. Actually, when my staff watch this, they're gonna be like, "Oh my God, I can't believe she said that." But it's true. The best time to plant a shade tree is 20 years ago. The next best time is today, right? And that is so true. We in our community, and probably everywhere, but in our community, we do have catching up to do. There is a disconnect between a student in, let's say, one of our, we live in an impoverished community in our urban settings, in our rural settings. And on one side of this, and on the other side of it, you have some of the most high-level career opportunities. You have some of the biggest companies in the entire world in our backyards, and so there's this gap that needs to be filled. There's these connections that need to be made, and that's when I talk about the most part in that, and this holistic approach where we're all involved with that. But I will say what's really heartening is that I think there is starting to be this buy-in from every angle. When a company as big as a Micron comes in and says, we have thousands of jobs to fill, but we are also committed to STEM education for everyone. What happens is everybody wants that, right, to reach that goal. And they have the ability to remove the barriers, right? A lot of times, it's not that we didn't know all of this, right? But there are barriers. There's lacking resources. There's, just different challenges. A company like that could come in and elevate all of us by removing some of those barriers, by expecting more community partnerships, expecting results. And I think we are all on the same page right now, from the schools and families to anybody that's providing STEM education programming or any sort of programming for children. It doesn't have to be STEM, anything that supports them in their life and in their education, all the way to these sort of end game big companies where we hope that our children work.
Yeah. Do you think there's underrepresented areas in this community that aren't getting the STEM education?
I know there is. There absolutely is. And in fact, sort of the same communities that I have mentioned. But I do think it's across the board. But we actually, the most is right downtown. So the Syracuse City School District is our district. So when we create programming, when we look at exhibits, we're always looking at New York State curriculum and what kids need to learn to be better students and to better understand their studies, but with a real focus on our city school district. And one of the things that, and again, I think I bring my sort of nonprofit lens, and I certainly brought it at the time as we were starting to implement programs. We really are trying to address that, the lack of diversity in STEM. And the way we do that is we actually have a whole series of programs. They're called impact programs. Impact is an acronym for our core values. The ones that we focus on the most happen to be inclusion and accessibility. So making things discounted or free is a huge part of that. And that's where the more paid admissions and memberships and sponsors we have, the better, so that these programs can remain free. And then inclusion is really important. So we look at inclusion in a couple different ways, making everything inclusive to everybody, but also really giving kids opportunities to work with people like them. So, and what I mean by that is we have things like sensory-friendly science, which is specifically for neurodiverse students and learners. We have a Future Women in STEM program, but it's really cool because it's with MACNY. So the focus is on girls in STEM and manufacturing. So that's pretty unique and been a huge success. And then we have a Future Innovators program, which is a program for students of color working with scientists of color. And that is probably the most important type of thing that we do, not only because these kids deserve these opportunities and because we want them to have them and because diversity is the right thing to do. That's a good enough reason to do it as far as I'm concerned. But more importantly, we all benefit from that. And we really do. I see it all the time. We do these really cool, we call them inclusion showcases. So next month will be our Pride Scientist Showcase. And every month we feature different scientists from underrepresented groups. We've been doing this for years now, haven't replicated a single scientist. And every time I look at these things, I think without that Black scientist's innovation or that woman's invention, where would we be, right? So continuing that trajectory is not only important, but I think at the most we feel it's our responsibility to do that. So it's one of the best things I think that we do.
Yeah, no, I love those programs. That's really cool. I didn't know that. To me, even just like entrepreneurial kind of side of things, I think the hardest part is allowing yourself to think that you can become that. And if you don't see others in that position that look like you, sound like you, feel like you might think, well, that's for someone else. I don't, belong there. I think the hardest part for me, even kind of taking it on an entrepreneurial side of things, is like, I didn't even think like owning a company is like in the cards. Like that's just like, a myth. So I can see someone, a little girl who doesn't see a lot of scientists or whatever, never even thinking that role is for them. So I think seeing that, I think is really, really powerful for them, just being able to say, there's someone that is like me that's doing that. And that is that kind of like one of the points. Yeah.
Yep. It's like I'm seeing someone who looks like me. And by making it accessible, I think sometimes too, we're saying to kids, like, you can do this. You can do this. I think one of the challenges in STEM too is that we have to break down these notions that you have to have 1,600 on your SATs and straight A's, and you have to
STEM's usually smarty pants stuff.
Exactly,
that was never for me. Yeah.
Exactly. And we have to and a lot of times, as we all know, scientists fail millions of times before they get it right.
It's part of the process.
Exactly. So giving kids that understanding. And quite frankly, let's face it, for some of these STEM careers, you don't even need a college degree. You can do it. You can go to trade school. You can become an apprentice. I mean, there's so many opportunities for students that we have to expose them to. The most really tries hard to do that. And I think that is part of the reason we have transformed not only our programming, but even our exhibits. And so let's do most in that respect. But I think that exposure to all children is, and starting at a young age, is so important. And even if they don't end up in STEM, whether they're just appreciating science or had a really great experience on that day at the most, then that's successful too. I mean, I didn't study science. And in fact, when I got to the most, I got to an institution that needed to be saved. It was in that part of the nonprofit cycle where it was almost like do or die. So there was a lot of risk. So they hired someone without a science background, a young single mom. Not a lot of science museum presidents are hockey moms in 4-inch heels without a science background. So I had a little bit of that imposter syndrome going on. I knew that we were going to be taking some significant risks, which is also sometimes not thought of in a nonprofit, to take risks and to do things differently. And so I think that if we can teach kids that all of that's okay, right? You don't have to fit a mold. There is no one shape, size, color, religion that does these things, that has these jobs. If we can get kids to see that too, that sort of social, emotional aspect of it, then we've actually really done probably the most important part of it. The STEM education piece is the easy, fun stuff for us. Yeah. It's all this other stuff that's really challenging, but most important.
Like that. Have you seen any success stories or anything that you've seen, anybody that revisits the most, or anything that you want to share like that?
We actually have a lot of those. We really do. We have, smaller ones like, we do this great partnership with the Syracuse City School District, and we're at a point in its growth where kids are coming back for consecutive grade levels, 4 and 5 and 6, and as just a few of them. And so we've heard kids say, oh, I remember that, or let's go do this thing. So just small things like remembering remembering a science exhibit from year over year in and of itself is cool. And to me, that is success, right? It resonated with the students so much that they remembered it. And then we have greater ones. We have kids that come back year after year for our science fair. Our science fair is the regional feeder for the International Science Fair. And in fact, right now we have our 2 grand prize winners in LA competing in the International Science Fair. And these are kids who have come back year after year. One of our former science fair winners just finished up at Stanford, and now he's working on his PhD there, and has actually talked about how great some of the programs he was involved with at the most helped. It gave him, he's incredibly brilliant. It's not that he needed the most necessarily in his case in terms of education, but again, maybe exposed him to other kids who are doing the same things, right? Gave him a support system in a way. And we have tons of those stories. But for me, and I tell my staff this because it is a lot of work, and we are a small staff, and we are trying to do a lot. If in our time, just a handful of kids get it right, or do better on a test, or just a couple of kids go on to study STEM, or maybe just a few go on to fill those thousands of micron jobs, then we did it. We did what we set out to do. But I think that there's a lot more out there than just that.
Yeah. I want to ask you a tough question here. If there's 3 things that we could do to increase our children's education, either through STEM or just have them kind of think and grow to be better humans, what would those 3 things be?
Oh my gosh. Well, I would say the first one is actually encourage reading. Encourage their love of reading. Great learners tend to not only read a lot, but love to read. So the smartest people I know read a lot, but no matter what job or what you do in your life, literacy is a huge aspect of that. But it's so funny because this kind of sounds opposite, but at the same time, I think encouraging play. We I think sometimes are too quick to have kids seated at a desk and doing work, but a place like the most, or your backyard, or encourage them to play and learn and be curious.
Yeah, and interact. I found that the most interesting thing about the most, actually, when I first went in there as an adult, it's all play. I mean, in my opinion, right? Like I look at it, and there's lots of different things, and you see kids running around and touching things and pressing buttons, and there's a lot of noise, and you're just hearing things. So I think of a museum, especially like in my 20s, like I was just like, I don't want to go to a museum. It's all like stiff, boring. But like I've been finding play has been introduced a lot in different museums.
It is. It's hugely important for children. And of course, our museum in particular it is for all ages, but really primarily K through 8. And so, and we know this, right? We learn best by doing. We especially learned that during COVID, because it was like, okay, a classroom is better than a virtual setting, but hands-on is always how you're going to learn best for so many reasons, and how you, because it's everything. It's your hands, it's your mind, it's solving problems. So that's probably my second one. And then I would say lastly, and it's because I experienced this as a practitioner of education and as a parent, and if I could do things differently with those teenagers, I would, is we live in a high-tech world, but don't be so quick to give them technology. Technology is a tool. So my kid doesn't need to necessarily do coding to learn coding. I'd rather have them just be great readers and writers and mathematicians. And I say that in part too because of this whole thing with social media, and it's a distraction in everybody's life. And I think social media has changed education. If I ever leave the most, this is actually what I'm going to do with my life is study anthropology in the context of social media and education. I find it fascinating. we listen to people on TikTok more than we listen to our teachers, and that has to stop. And one of the ways we can do that is if, as parents and as educators and as a society, if we just let them be kids. Our DNA has not evolved all that much that we need to be putting, iPhones in kids' hands with Snapchat and pushing that off as long as we can is great for their mental health too. Again, taking a holistic approach here. Mental health for students is so important to their education. And so that would be my other. If I could have done it differently, my kids in their 16 and 19 still wouldn't have phones. So I think those would be my top 3.
All right, switching gears a little bit here. Have you ever had a big challenge, and how have you overcame it?
Oh, all the time. I have. I think I actually have a couple big challenges that sort of go hand in hand. So I mentioned how, the most was in a part of its life cycle where I became president, where the old wasn't working and something had to change. And again, we had to really look at everything. And looking back, I probably shouldn't have been so fearful of what we did, which was really just doing all the things we were supposed to do, but knowing that they were going to take time, right? So really working at fulfilling that mission of informal hands-on STEM education. What does that look like in terms of exhibits? What does that look like in terms of programs? And we were starting all these things during COVID to add to the level of fear and challenge. And I think it was difficult because what if it didn't work, right? On paper, those were the right things to do. But what happens if it doesn't work? So that was really a stressful time, and trying to raise money at the same time, and trying to bring it to the marketing to a digital platform, and adding staff and fixing the building. So there's all these things, right, that had to be considered, and it was a lot, and it was really stressful. And I had and oftentimes, I think in nonprofit leadership more than anything else, the leader is in the sort of sitting in the middle of a board, a group of people who are your boss, and then this other group of people who report to you, and you're just like sitting there alone and trying to make sure that you're doing everything right for everybody. And the challenge too is to not really bring that stress into your personal life, and which is difficult. Probably the only downfall about being so passionate and committed to work is you can't extract yourself from it.
Work-life balance does not exist.
It doesn't, and that's difficult. And that is very challenging. But of course, too, to make that happen, to get to that place, I did have to be surrounded with the best people. And actually, I remember my predecessor saying to me, the hardest thing you'll do is manage people. And I will say, I was like, no, not for me. I'm a people person. Like, that's going to be the easy stuff for me. But it's not true, because I'm flawed, and the people that work for me are flawed, and the people I report to are flawed. So how do you get everybody and all the stuff that they bring? Because again, there's no work-life balance like there should be. How do you get everybody to not only just to work hard and to be competent and to be kind, but how do you get them also remembering why we're doing it, focused on that? And when things are tough, that's hard. And that's probably been the combination of those things is probably my biggest challenge ever. I look forward to not having to ever have to do that again, I hope. But in the end, again, looking back, not only is it worth it because it paid off, because we've been successful in those things that we've been implementing, but I am a firm believer in that the growth happens through the challenges, the personal growth, the professional growth, the opportunity even happens through challenges. I'm a better human being for having been through that than not.
Yeah. I talk so many times about the same stories and how I deal with all this as well. I don't. I can go on for days about exactly what you just said, and I've mentioned these things in different podcasts, and I'll kind of start over again, I guess. But I remember, because I was independent contracting for forever, and I was just doing gigs, and I was just like, I was totally happy. It was just me just doing it. I maybe would hire a friend to like help me out. And it got to a point where I was like getting too busy, and I was like, okay, like let me start this business. And I was super pumped about it. I was like, this is going to be easy. I'm going to grow. We're going to do all these projects, I'll be an agency, whatever. And I specifically remember sitting down with a client who I've just worked with for a couple of years, and she said, are you sure you want to do that? Like, do you understand like what's going to come with that? And everyone else was just like super pumped for me. Like, you should just go for it. That's exciting. Like, you're just going to bloom and it's going to be fantastic. And she was the only one that like put some doubt in my mind. And I was just like, I wonder like what she meant by that. And then a year later, I like had a moment. I was like, oh, this is what she meant by that. Because managing and dealing different projects, and you always think, all right, if I just do these 10 things, we're going to be fine. But then you complete those 10 things, and you know what happens? 10 more things happen. And you got to complete those 10 things. And then you grow, and then more things come. And then you grow, and more things come, or things happen. And I never in a million years would have ever thought I'd be having to deal with that kind of stuff. I'll give you a funny example. Last night, one of our team members had a bat in their house, and the bat bit their cat.
Oh my gosh.
And now he has to deal with that. And then his cat like scratched him, and he doesn't know what to do. And he's supposed to be on a shoot today. And he's supposed to be at the shoot at like 9:00, and it's an hour-long drive. So no one's even like on their phone, like answering, but then we still have to fulfill it. The client can't just be like, oh, wow, we have to figure this out. Right. So I never would have like thought like but those come up consistently because these things happen and people are flawed and life is flawed and it's messy and you have to kind of just get in it.
Right.
So,
they're probably thinking you made that up.
Yeah. Right? Like, yeah, sure. Okay. What really happened? Right. So I find that stuff so interesting that we have to, there's so many things there that people just don't see that I think make it more challenging, but also makes it exciting. Because I look at that experience that happened even this morning. I'm like, well, how do we prevent that in the future, right? Do we have someone on call at all times? How do we do that? And then once you start putting in these practices and like FAQs, you'll be able to figure it out. But it gets messy though first.
Oh my God, it does. It does. We're constantly evolving, right? And it actually it's one of the things that we're dealing with now. That is a lot different from when we first started is now we have growing pains. So all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, our attendance is great. Our memberships are record. Like we're doing all the things we set out to do and it's so awesome. And we're high-fiving each other. But then it's like, oh my God, we have to manage this growth. And that is stressful because you don't want to move backwards and you don't want to lose, you don't want to lose sight of the future and the end game and all the strategic thinking that you're doing to keep you evolving, but you have to address things right now. We have had to add capacity and change policies and there's all these, and we're just stressed out. I actually had somebody on my staff say, every month you say like things are going to calm down and then they just never do. And when she said that same thing, like she said it sort of in jest, but I was like, you know what? She's right. And I have to stop saying that because they're obviously not going to calm down. And if I keep telling people that, I'm diminishing the work we're doing now and what we're trying to do. So managing all of that is tricky. And dealing with those sort of anomaly things that happen along the way. I've never had that one though, but we've had some interesting ones. You can't be a public-facing institution for over 100,000 people every year, most of whom are kids, and not have interesting, crazy things happen. But sort of keeping the day-to-day intact, but also looking towards the future. Sometimes it's a lot of fun, and actually, most of the time I love it, but it can be really challenging and stressful.
Yeah. I just keep telling myself that in 5 years, I'm going to look back at these moments and just be like, man, that was crazy. That was wild, you know?
Yeah.
When you're in it,
Not so much.
But I do think, 10 years ago, I would have freaked out about every single little hiccup that happened. Like, oh, it needs to be perfect, needs to be perfect. And now I'm just kind of like, all right, well, that's interesting. What do we do? Like, here's the facts, right? These are really the only three solutions. Let's pick one, see what we can do, move forward. And I think having that that sense that you deal with enough crap, that doesn't really seem that like difficult. You just kind of just, all right, it'll
work itself
whatever.
out, right?
Yeah.
Or what do you guys think? A lot of times if I'm struggling with something, I just throw it out to everybody else and say, hey, what do you think? But and then I think sometimes too, you do just have to keep that in mind. Like at the end of the day, at the end of the month, I mean, how challenging will I feel that this is, right? And accepting that that's just part of that's just sort of part of the territory. Is things are going to always be flying at you, and sometimes there's easy fixes, sometimes they're not. But again, I think when you surround yourself with the right people, sometimes those solutions are not too far away.
Yeah, absolutely. I think my superpower is I have a high pain tolerance for just stuff. I was like, all right, my car got in an accident, I can't get to work. All right, well, what do I do? Like I don't freak out. I don't do any of that. It's just more of like, okay, what happens? Which probably drives like my team nuts because they're like, the house is burning down. Like, what are we going to do? I'm like, all right, well, these are the options. We can do this. The house goes away or this,
I bet it doesn't drive them crazy, or if it does, not for too long, right? I think that a great leader does exactly that.
Yeah.
And even if that might not necessarily be how somebody else would do it, I think people appreciate that. Really, because I have a similar, I might freak out privately, but I have a similar like, yeah, okay, well, we're just going to deal with it. It's a problem. It's how I am at home too with my kids. Yeah. It's a problem. How are we going to tackle it? Yeah. We can do. My daughter says this to herself over and over, and I've adopted it. She says to herself, "I can do hard things," and I tell myself that too. I can do hard things, and it helps just to remind yourself you can.
Yep. So to wrap up every show, I ask 3 questions to all my guests here. You already talked about how books are important. So do you have a book that you love or a book that you would recommend?
Oh, geez. I would say I love Hemingway. A Movable Feast and The Sun Also Rises are probably my 2 favorite books. I also spent 11 years working at Syracuse Stage. That was my first job after I got my master's. And this is actually a script and a book, but I read this script, A Lesson Before Dying by Ernest Gaines. Probably one of the most powerful things I've ever read and seen on a stage.
Cool. What keeps you going?
Oh gosh, a lot of things, but mostly what keeps me going is really feeling like I'm part of a solution. I'm making a difference. For me, kids are everything. My own kids, everybody else's kids. At work, they call me the most mom. Helping our children live in a better place, have a better future. That not only makes the hard work worth it, but it's actually really exciting to me. Because I think the best thing you can do is do something for the 7th generation, so to speak. So to be able to do that every day is actually a real blessing.
What excites you most about Central New York today?
I think we're on this really, I really think that we've been on this sort of trajectory for a long time of growth and change. But I think in like the recent couple of years, it's tangible. I see it, right? I see growth. I see change. I see, I do see this sort of, again, understanding that we're planting shade trees now. I didn't see that before. I think people know, like we're doing the work now, that we're not going to see tomorrow. It's going to be a long time down the road, but we are the people that are starting it today. Again, primarily for our students, for their future. Seeing everybody sort of come together from public sector to private sector to little nonprofits like the Most. that is probably the most exciting thing to be a part of and to witness.